This is the story of Air Canada Flight 680. On the 17th of September 1979, an Air Canada DC-9 was on the ground at Boston, getting ready for the flight to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Can I just say that the Air Canada liveries peaked with this livery right here? In my opinion, the Rouge livery comes close, but this right here is the best. If someone from Air Canada is watching, please put this livery on a 787 or something. I will love you forever. The flight today had 50 people on board with 45 passengers and 5 crew members. The DC-9 lined up and took off at 12:12 p.m. local time, and soon Flight 680 was on the climb. They had to get to their cruising altitude of 25,000 feet. As the jet climbed, the pilots worked through the checklists. It was mundane, but it had to be done, and on this day, nothing really stood out to the crew. Minutes later, they had reached their cruising altitude of 25,000 feet. They were looking forward to a boring cruise, and then an explosion rocked the jet as the air was sucked out of the passenger jet at near supersonic velocities. Something on board had catastrophically given way. The first officer was the one flying the plane when the loud bang rocked the airplane. While the plane was in autopilot, the pilots donned their oxygen masks and carried out communication checks. Looking back, the pilots saw that the cockpit door was somehow missing and the blue sky at the back of the plane. This was very bad. A huge chunk of their tail had to be missing if they could see straight out the back of the plane. The pilots knew that they had to get the jet down to a more breathable altitude, and fast. They said, "Boston Center Air Canada 680 is doing a rapid emergency descent. Clearance back to Boston. We're out of 23,000, descending." Tower immediately cleared the jet for a right turn and cleared them back directly to Boston. As the pilots brought the jet down, they let the controllers know that they had an explosive decompression and that they would be leveling off at 9,000 feet. Then, as Flight 680 got a sense of what was going on, air traffic control got this chilling transmission. "Roger, we are just leveling off now, and the back end of our tail is blown off completely. Could you have some emergency crews standing by?" The explosive decompression was worse than anyone had anticipated. They needed to get this DC-9 on the ground now. As they flew the wounded bird, the flight attendants told the pilots that everyone was accounted for and okay, except for one flight attendant who sustained a slight impact on her head. Once they had leveled off, the first officer went into the cabin to make sure that everyone was okay and to assess the situation. Once the first officer got back into the cockpit, the captain told him that the right engine would not go beyond an EPR value of 1.25, but they still had all of their hydraulic systems. If they had lost their hydraulic systems, then this plane would have been way harder to land. The flight crew wanted the closest runway to them, and that was runway 33 left at Boston. Once the controllers knew that they were headed for runway 33 left, they sent a small army of emergency services to the runway, ready for anything that might happen. As the pilots lined the jet up with the runway, Boston Approach asked the pilots if they had any problems with the controls, and thankfully the controls were still kind of responsive. Well, at least for now anyway. They had a tough landing ahead of them. They needed to lose speed and altitude, but the engines weren't as responsive as usual. And since they needed a little bit of margin if something went wrong, they decided to come in higher than usual. They decided to use their flaps and landing gear to lose altitude because those created drag. With that, the pilots lined the crippled jet up with runway 33 left. Then, they slowly started to take the plane down. They had no idea what their jet was capable of, and everything that they did from this point on might send them straight into the ground. But the jet held together and the pilots brought the plane to a stop on runway 33 left. Their ordeal was over. We only have one picture of what happened to the plane. I looked all over the internet for an image of the damaged DC-9 from the outside, but I wasn't able to find anything. If you have an image of the DC-9, send me an email or drop it in the comments. I'd love to see it. Once on the ground, they got to know that their plane was not all there. The drink cart, the fuselage tail cone, and the lavatory water supply tank was all gone. So, if the drink cart was sucked out of the hole that was made in the fuselage, then it wasn't really a small hole, was it? It's not a small miracle that this jet was able to get back on the ground safely. The whole reason that this jet was able to land was because of the fact that most of the control surfaces in the back had been left intact. Sure, some trim systems had been damaged, but nothing too important. Had those been damaged, then there was very little chance that this plane would have been able to make it back safely. Now, for the question that everyone had been wondering about, how did a passenger jet lose its tail? Well, it came down to the aft pressure bulkhead. You know how some people say that an airplane is just a metal can? Well, that's more true than you think, because when you're in a plane, you're inside what's known as a pressure vessel. and a pressurized section is capped off with a semi-spherical bulkhead at the back. Well, in the case of Flight 680, the aft pressure bulkhead had developed cracks. How did it develop cracks, you ask? Well, when the bulkhead was assembled, they had to install a fastener in the bulkhead, and while installing that fastener, a small gouge was created in the metal of the bulkhead. And over the next couple of years, the cracks grew more and more until one day in 1979, the crack just got too large. Doing the math on this, they found out that the crack had been growing ever since the very first time that the plane was pressurized, meaning that this had just been sitting there in the making from the moment that this jet left the ground for the very first time for testing. But it should have never gotten this far. Planes get taken out of service and are inspected periodically to make sure that nothing like this ever happens. On the 5th of May 1979, just mere months before the accident, the plane was taken out of service and a check was carried out. X-rays were taken of the bulkhead and the investigators needed to know if those X-rays showed any cracks. Sure enough, when they got the X-rays, they could see that a crack was forming. To use the language that the report used, the crack was, quote, clearly discernible and easily identifiable, end quote. Apparently, company inspection and quality control procedures allowed this discrepancy to go by undetected. What is even more shocking is that once this issue came to light, they decided to inspect all DC-9s in the fleet, and they found out that one of the planes, which was in Regina, Saskatchewan at the time, had these cracks, and it was immediately pulled from service. Once broader inspections were carried out across the entire fleet, they found out that a staggering 33 DC-9s from 7 carriers had this issue. In the case of Flight 680, it's just scary how close this plane came to crashing. Even if this particular flight from Boston to Yarmouth had landed safely, it would have just been a matter of time before one of those bulkheads failed. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, you'll know that I've covered this crash a while back. So why am I covering it again? One, because I thought I could do a better job with the visuals on this version, and also because I was reminded of this accident by what's happening with Boeing and the 737 MAX right now. The similarities are eerie. Now, if you don't know or if you've been living under a rock, a 737 MAX from Alaska Airlines lost its emergency exit door mid-flight. When that final report comes out, I'll definitely make a video on it. But in both cases, you had a situation where improper assembly led to problems really down the road. In the case of the Boeing, it was a loose bolt, and in the case of the DC-9, it was a fastener. In both cases, you have the issue plaguing multiple airlines and multiple aircraft, and in both cases, it was a structural failure. And in both cases, they were able to bring the plane back down safely. I can't be the only one that sees the similarities here, right? Reading up on the discourse over the years, I've heard that Boeing's acquisition of McDonnell Douglas tainted the engineering culture at Boeing. At first, I didn't think too much about that. But now, after what's happened on the 737 MAX, first with MCAS and now the bolts, at the very least, it feels that Boeing just can't catch a break. The 737 MAX, at least for right now, seems to be following the steps of the DC-9. Let's just hope that it doesn't follow in the steps of the DC-10. What do you think, though? Do you think that the McDonnell Douglas acquisition has harmed Boeing in some way? Do you think that Boeing has lost its once untouchable engineering prowess? Or do you think that this is just a string of bad luck for Boeing? Me personally, I'm still flying on 737 MAXs all the time, and CEOs and airlines have come out in support of Boeing with statements and multi-billion-dollar orders for the 737, but time will tell. Hey guys, it's Aaron. I'm editing the video right now, and I totally forgot to include this in the video, but the plane that was involved in this accident, Charlie Foxtrot Tango Lima uniform, was later involved in an accident. It's Air Canada 797. It caught fire in Cincinnati, and I think that's really sad, and I forgot to add this information in the video, and I'm just putting it here right now while I'm editing. Let me know if you want me to make a video on that. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.